Back in 1995 is an incredibly ambitious game. One of the most ambitious games I've seen in a long time. Perhaps too ambitious. I was reading comments about this game and some people said, well, at least this game will be easy to make because the graphics are so bad. Making a bad game would be easy. Activision do it all the time, but making a good game that looks bad is a different story. The second reason this is an ambitious game is that the developers picked one of the hardest genres to get right, the survival horror genre. It would be very easy to argue that they didn't get this right and that the game is not a survival horror, but it would be a bit like shooting fish in a barrel, and anyway, it's hard to say what's purposely made bad and what's genuinely bad game design. For example, I've seen people complain about the combat in the game, but then survival horror games shouldn't have good combat. Then on the other hand, there's no run button, so if you're not really good at fighting the enemies and you can't run away from the enemies, what are you supposed to do? Just kind of slowly walk around the map, which kind of looks silly really. But I don't want to get off on the wrong foot and I don't want to have a completely negative video, so I'm going to talk about a few things I do like about the game first. I showed this game to a few people and they compared it to different survival horror games. Some people would say it would look like Resident Evil and some would say it looks like Silent Hill, but for me it looks more like the original Alone in the Dark series. That's one thing I like about back in 1995. This game will mean different things to different people, depending on which games they have previously played. I can see why people would get a Silent Hill vibe from the gameplay. I personally don't see much of a resemblance to Resident Evil, except for the obvious things like fixed camera angles. It's not for me to say how a game makes other people feel, but I did want to put the game into some kind of perspective and some sort of timeline. We know from the game's title that it was set in 1995. Silent Hill came out in 1999 and graphically doesn't really compare to it. Back in 1995 looks more like what you would see on a Sega Saturn, way more primitive than the games in 1999. Resident Evil 2 came out in 1998. I always thought that Silent Hill came after Resident Evil 1, not 2, but it turns out that 1 came out in 1996. So this game was set even before Resident Evil 1 came out, which would fit with an observation I made when I first seen the screenshots for this game. To me this game looks like it was released just after the Alone in the Dark series. A telltale sign of this is the very basic texture mapping in the game, which is what gives it the graphics that some people are calling ugly. The menus are a perfect blend of Alone in the Dark, Resident Evil and Silent Hill, yet at the same time they feel unique. There is a lot about this game I like, or maybe I should say there is a lot about the idea of this game that I like. It's full of classic references to survival horror games. The disc spinning loading screen on a download only game, the doors that can only be opened from one side, the Metal Gear Solid stroke Eternal Darkness video moment. Although it was pretty cool how the developers added them to the game, all they really do is bring a smirk to my face and then remind me there's nothing original going on here. People say that the graphics on the monsters are pretty bad, but it doesn't really bother me. If anything, it feels authentic to the time period that the game was set in. But what does bug me, and I mentioned this earlier, is there's no run button. It makes the game feel like there's no urgency and you can just stroll around the enemies and not really worry about them. Now the game does actually explain this lack of the ability to run, but that doesn't somehow magically make it all better or make me feel better about the fact that I can't run. Another thing that bugs me is that there's no voice acting in the game. Let me just let you hear an example of the voice acting from the trailer.
Why have you come back now, after all this time? What I can see today, here in 1995.
Maybe it's just me, but I think that guy sounds really cool, and to have him read all the text in the game would instantly make it 10 times better. I want it back in 1995 to be great, and it really did come close. It's just such a shame because I feel like a lot of effort has went into making the game look authentic, and in some respects it does feel authentic too. But I can't help but feel it was just rushed to meet some kind of release date. There are a few moments that achieved what the developers wanted, but just not enough. But I don't even regret buying the game. For me, buying this game is more like a donation. It's me saying to the developers, your heart's in the right place, and hopefully you'll create something with more content later. What I did get from playing back in 1995 is a reminder of how unique Alone in the Dark, Resident Evil and Silent Hill games are, and how it's difficult to capture what those games had.